listen to the sound of the wind. Not the soft breeze of a London summer, but the biting, predatory howl of the Canadian wilderness in 1913. Most stories about villains begin in a dark room or a broken home, but the story of Unity Valkyrie Mitford begins in a place so ironically named that if it were fiction, you'd call it lazy writing. It begins in a gold prospector's shack in a settlement called Swastika, Ontario. Her father, David Mitford, later the second Lord Redesdale, wasn't there for the scenery, he was there for the gold. He didn't find any, but in that frozen cabin, amidst the scent of pine and desperation, Unity was conceived. She was born 9 months later, on August 8, 1914, just as the guns of August began to tear Europe apart. Her grandfather, a man obsessed with a racial hierarchy, insisted on the middle name Valkyrie, the war maidens of Wagner, who chose who lived and who died on the battlefield. Thump, thump. That is the heartbeat of a dynasty. The Mitfords weren't just rich. In England, money is common, ancestry is power. Their bloodline reached back to 1066, a tangled mess of lords, diplomats, and eccentrics. They lived in country piles like Batsford House, massive stone monuments where they occupied only the rooms they could afford to heat. Whistle. Imagine a childhood where you wore a coat to the dinner table and your only friends were the ghosts in the schoolroom. But here is the logic that people often miss. Unity wasn't born evil. She was born into a vacuum. In a family of 6 sisters, Unity was the middle child in the most brutal sense. She wasn't the literary genius like Nancy. She wasn't the breathtaking, world-stopping beauty like Diana. She was Unity, the one who felt invisible. And in the aristocratic world of the 1920s, being invisible was a fate worse than death. Clack, clack, the sound of high heels on a ballroom floor. To be noticed, Unity turned herself into a spectacle. She brought a pet rat to debutante balls. She wore a live grass snake as a necklace. Eek! She delighted in the screams of the other girls. It was her first hit of power. The realization that if you can't be loved for your beauty, you can at least be feared for your strangeness. But the real transformation happened in the nursery, a place they called the linen cupboard. This is where the world's future wars were rehearsed. Unity and her younger sister Jessica shared a room, but they didn't share a soul. They drew a literal line down the middle of the floor. On Jessica's side, the hammer and sickle of communism. On Unity's, the swastika. Think about that for a second. We see siblings today argue over music or fashion, but the Mitford girls were playing for keeps. They weren't just decorating, they were choosing sides in a global apocalypse before they were even old enough to vote. There is a popular theory that their father's cruelty, the famous child hunts, where he chased them with bloodhounds, is what broke them. Woof, woof. But I have a different take. I believe it wasn't the cruelty that made Unity a fanatic, it was the absurdity. When your life is a joke, you look for something, anything that feels serious. Unity looked at the chaotic, polite, crumbling world of the British elite, and she hated it. She wanted something iron. She wanted a god. And in 1933, she decided she knew exactly where to find him. She told her mother she wanted to go to Munich to learn the language. Sydney Mitford, a woman who believed discipline solved everything, handed her the ticket. She thought she was sending her daughter to a finishing school. In reality, she was sending a Valkyrie back to the fire. The girl from Swastika was going home. Munich, 1934. The air in the Bavarian capital didn't smell like the damp woods of England. It smelt of heavy cigars, dark beer, and the electric ozone of a revolution that had finally seized the throne. Unity Mitford arrived in Munich not as a tourist, but as a predator on a mission. She didn't want to see the museums, she wanted to see him. But here's the detail most people skip. Hitler was the most guarded man in Europe. You didn't just book an appointment with the Führer. So, Unity used the only weapon she had, absolute grinding persistence. She found out he liked to eat at a small wood-panelled restaurant called the Osteria Bavaria. Clink, clink, the sound of a silver spoon hitting a teacup day after day for 10 long months.
Every single lunchtime, Unity sat at the same table, alone, reading a book or scribbling in her diary, always positioned in his direct line of sight. She was a 20-year-old blonde giantess with the pale skin of the British elite, a literal Valkyrie sitting in his favourite lunch spot. It wasn't just stalking, it was a psychological siege. Finally, on February 9th, 1935, the siege broke. Hitler sent his adjutant over. The message was simple: the Führer would like to speak with you. Unity didn't stumble. She didn't blush. She walked over to his table as if she were fulfilling a prophecy. They spoke for 30 minutes. She wrote to her father that night, her handwriting practically vibrating off the page. "I am so happy, I wouldn't mind a bit dying. I think I am the luckiest girl in the world." Now, let's look at the logic from the other side. Why did Hitler, a man who distrusted almost everyone, let this English girl into his inner circle? 140 meetings followed. He invited her to the Berghof. He gave her a private box at the Olympics. He even used her to make his girlfriend, Eva Braun, jealous. Most historians say he liked her Nordic beauty. That's the shallow answer. The deeper truth: Unity was Hitler's trophy. She was proof that the British aristocracy, the people he secretly admired and feared, recognized his greatness. She wasn't just a girl to him, she was a diplomatic seal of approval. Every time they were seen together, it sent a message to London: even your lords and ladies belong to me. But there is a darker, colder edge to this friendship that often gets ignored. In 1938, Unity told Hitler she wanted to live in Munich permanently. His solution? He gave her a luxury apartment. Click, the sound of a key turning in a lock. But that apartment wasn't empty because of a sale. It belonged to a Jewish couple who had been removed. Unity didn't flinch. She walked through the rooms, admiring the furniture that still held the warmth of the people who had been dragged out of it. This is the point where eccentricity curdles into something truly sinister. She wasn't a victim of his charisma. She was a willing architect of the nightmare. Even the British government was terrified. Declassified MI5 files from the era revealed that agents were tracking her every move, labeling her more Nazi than the Führer himself. They watched as she signed her letters Heil Hitler and wore a gold swastika badge pinned over her heart, a gift from the man himself. She truly believed she was the bridge. She told anyone who would listen that England and Germany were brother nations that should never, ever fight. She thought her friendship could stop the coming storm.
But bridges are the first things to burn when a war starts. As 1939 approached, the lucky girl was about to realize that when you make a pact with a monster, you don't get to choose when the dance ends. The music was about to stop, and Unity Mitford had nowhere left to hide. September 3rd, 1939. Tick, tick, tick. The sound of a radio warming up in a quiet flat in Munich. Then the voice of Neville Chamberlain, heavy with defeat, announcing that Great Britain was now at war with Germany. For most of the world, this was the beginning of a global nightmare, but for Unity Mitford, it was the end of her identity. For 6 years, she had lived in a delusion that she was the golden bridge between the two nations she loved. She truly believed her presence at Hitler's side was a diplomatic shield, but when the first sirens wailed, that bridge didn't just crack, it vaporized. Crack, Unity was a fanatic, yes, but she was a fanatic with a very British sense of fair play. She had promised her friends and even Hitler himself that if her two worlds ever fought, she wouldn't choose, she would simply exit. She walked to the Englischer Garden, a sprawling park in the heart of Munich, where she had spent so many happy afternoons. The leaves were just beginning to turn. She sat on a bench, pulled out that pearl-handled pistol, the one the Führer had given her as a token of friendship, and she made a choice that most people find impossible to wrap their heads around. But here is the logic flip most historians don't mention. Unity's act wasn't just about grief, it was her final, ultimate performance. In her mind, she was a Valkyrie. She was staging a Wagnerian tragedy. She wanted her death to be as significant as her life. Except fate had a much crueler plan.
The flash in the park didn't take her life. It left her in a state of living suspension. She was 25 years old, and though her heart kept beating, the Unity Mitford who dined with dictators was gone. She was taken to a clinic, and when Hitler heard the news, he did something unprecedented. He visited her. He stood by her bed, watched her struggle for breath, and paid her medical bills in full. Why? Was it love? Unlikely. It was the realization that his English dream, the hope of an alliance with the British elite, was laying there shattered in a hospital bed. Unity was the physical manifestation of his failure to conquer England with charm. When she was finally stable enough to travel, Hitler arranged for her to be sent back to England via neutral Switzerland. Chuff, chuff, the sound of a train carrying a traitor home. Imagine the scene at the dock in Folkestone. The British public was reeling from the first months of war, and here comes Lady Hitler, carried down a gangplank on a stretcher, looking gaunt, yellowed and confused. Boom! The flashbulbs of the press were like gunfire. People screamed for her to be imprisoned, for her to be tried as a traitor. But the government made a chilling discovery. The girl who once debated ideology with the Führer now had the mental capacity of a 10-year-old child. The bullet was still there, lodged at the back of her brain, too dangerous to remove. She was a living ghost. She went from being the most dangerous woman in the empire to a girl who spent her days making paper collages and asking for her pet rat. It's easy to pity her here, but let's keep our logic sharp. Is a person still a villain if they've forgotten their crimes? Or is the tragedy that she never had to face the reality of the war she helped encourage? Unity was back in the linen cupboard of her childhood, but this time there was no line on the floor. There was only a long, quiet wait for the end. Shh. The final act of Unity Mitford's life didn't take place on a grand stage or in a smoke-filled bunker. It played out in the whispers of the English countryside and the sterile silence of a hospital ward. When the Valkyrie returned to England in 1940, she was a logistical nightmare for the British government. Publicly, the people were screaming for justice. Thump! They wanted a traitor to pay. But privately, when MI5 agents looked into her eyes, they found nothing. The woman who once navigated the highest circles of the Third Reich was gone, replaced by a girl who couldn't even remember why she had gone to Germany in the first place. She spent her final years as a living ghost at the family estate in Swinbrook. And here is where the logic gets truly uncomfortable. While the world was burning, while London was being pulverized by the very planes she had cheered for, Unity was tucked away in a quiet room, protected by the very aristocratic privilege she had claimed to despise. There is a persistent dark legend that follows her to this day. A story that in 1940, at a private nursing home in Oxford, Unity Mitford gave birth to a secret child, the son of Adolf Hitler. Let's look at the cold logic behind that. Does it make sense? Probably not. Medical records and declassified files suggest her physical state was too precarious for such a thing. But why does the story persist? Because history hates a vacuum. We want our villains to be absolute. We want the English Valkyrie to have a final monstrous secret. The truth, that she was just a broken, brain-damaged girl waiting to die, is far less satisfying for the headlines. The end finally came in May 1948. That bullet, the one that had been lodged in her brain for 9 years, finally shifted. Sigh. It triggered an infection that her weakened body couldn't fight. She was 33 years old. She was buried in the churchyard at Swinbrook, and if you go there today, you will see a headstone that carries a line from a poem that was a favorite of Winston Churchill: "Say not the struggle naught availeth." Think about the staggering irony of that choice, a line about noble struggle and victory, carved onto the grave of a woman who spent her life worshipping the ultimate architect of defeat. My personal take, Unity Mitford wasn't a mastermind. She was the ultimate fanatic. She was a person who found the world so empty that she filled it with a monster. And in doing so, she became a caricature of the very class she represented, too privileged to be touched by the law, but too broken to ever truly be free. She remains the most divisive of the Mitford sisters. Nancy turned her into a joke. Diana stayed loyal to the memory. But Unity just became a warning that when you go looking for a god in the dark, you might just find exactly what you were looking for. The wind over Swinbrook has a long memory. Ssshhh. But even the wind eventually falls silent.